The general's car was the Mercedes that German Foreign Ribbentrop had owned, just like Hitler's car but not armored. Still, it weighed 9,000 pounds. Our next area to occupy was Kassel, Germany. That was where the 3rd Division headquarters was. The Vardy was just south, about 15 miles, in Melsungen. The battalions were stationed in small towns in the area. My job was to drive the executive officer, Coyne, around as we checked on the units. The first few weeks after occupying Germany, we were busy doing the things that occupiers always seem to do. That is, busting down doors looking for weapons. Actually, I don't think we broke down any doors, as the Germans politely opened them for us. As part of headquarters, I drove the exec around as he checked on how the raid was going. We got up early and the soldiers went to houses and apartments and checked for illegal weapons. As some of the buildings were several stories high, in a couple of hours the soldiers were very tired, so that the search became somewhat superficial. Try walking up and down 4 or 5 flights of stairs an hour or two, and you will get tired too. I never heard of any mistreatment of Germans, but it could have been done. Right after the surrender, all Germans were required to turn their weapons of all kinds, antiques and so on. No exceptions. Starting pistols too. In the small mountain of guns and weapons turned in, I picked out 2 machine guns and an Italian rifle. One was a Schmeisser and the other a grease gun. I mailed them home. They all got here, but the Italian rifle was intercepted and the bolt was taken out. I kept the machine guns for a while. For a few weeks after the war, the packages were not X-rayed, so you could ship almost anything home you wanted to. In addition to the above, I also picked out a .22 pistol. I got some .22 shorts and was going to do some target practice in my room. Instead of a firing pin, it had a sort of hammer to hit the end of the bullet with to set it off. So I set up some books in the room, loaded it, and took a shot. It almost took my eye out. When it went off, the casing went whistling back over my head. Apparently this was a starter pistol and was not meant to shoot a shell with a bullet in it. I felt real lucky not to get wounded after the war by a German weapon. No Purple Heart getting wounded that way. I got rid of it right away. Within a short time, we packed up and headed for Germany. In Melsungen, we were housed in some barracks that had been occupied by railroad repair crews, which was across the river from Melsungen. For bathing, we went to a public bath house for showers, which was in the town. I still had no regular assignment. The 3rd Division was a shell of its former self. If it had to fight a war, as we were always talking about with Russia, we would have been mincemeat for them. The division was decimated in its efforts to release all the men who had been in 4 years, the entire war, and replaced with us men unexperienced in the art of war. The division had not had any training since the war. It was a total disaster. But fortunately, no one took on Patton's idea of going on through to Moscow, but stayed in Germany. One day they told me to go to the officers' quarters and pick up the executive, as his regular driver had been fired for drunkenness. I checked out the 42 Buick and went up and picked him up. The officers' quarters were at the end of an unpaved driveway in a large 2-story house. I got him in the car and started out. At the end of the driveway, entering the main road, there was a ditch which was all grown over with tall grass. My right rear wheel went down into the ditch, and he was sitting right over it and probably bounced against the ceiling as the car came down. He exploded with rage and said, "Gudgel, if you can't do better than that, I'm going to fire you right now." But things settled down, and later he wanted me to become his Batman or personal attendant. But I declined the offer as I didn't want to be a servant. I tried to be a good chauffeur. It allowed me to take several trips to France and Le Havre, taking officers home for reassignment or discharge. This was the fun time for me in the Army. No regular duty except drive the colonel around or other officers. I went to Le Havre several times, always through Paris, coming and going. The first time it was a command car taking a lieutenant to go home. Outside Paris, the traffic was so little it was not enough to wear off the moss on the macadam roads. We were driving about 20 miles an hour and I just completely lost control. I was driving slowly because I knew the road was slick, but still we spun around and slid off the road. I composed myself and got back on the road and immediately lost control again. I began to think the officer would want to get out and walk, but he was a good guy and apparently understood the situation, and the next time I managed to keep control and we got to Le Havre in one piece.